Welcome back to Plato's Republic. Today we're going to finish up Book 6. If you are just joining us, you now have two options. You can either start at the beginning, check the description for a link, or you can look at the last video, just the beginning of Book 6 video. I think it's one of the more interesting videos I've made. At least the first 20 minutes, I lay out my esoteric reading of the first half of the Republic. So in the first video, I talk about how maybe Plato doesn't actually mean what he says here, and at the halfway point, I lay out the case for that. And I think it's pretty interesting to think about. In any event, I'll briefly summarize the first half of Book 6. We had Socrates telling us about all the great properties that philosophers have. And he starts out saying, he starts like leading Glaucon into agreeing that they should kind of be in charge of the cities. So he says, well, do you think someone should be in charge who can see or someone who can't see? And Glaucon says, someone who can see. And he says, well, yeah, see, a philosopher can see things that other people can't, so they should be in charge. And then he starts defending the philosopher against two charges, one of being useless and the other of being just bad at philosophy. And the first one, although I guess he says bad, he doesn't actually specify whether it's evil or just incompetent. I guess I would need to look at the Greek word for that. If someone else knows, leave a comment. But as for the charge about being useless, he gives this great extended metaphor about a ship owner who needs a captain. And all the sailors are kind of vying to be captain, and once they're put in charge, they just drink and feast and don't really give any thought or care to, the maritime arts. And the ship is just run incompetently as a result, and they kind of denigrate navigational skills. And so what he says is, in that sort of situation, the guy who actually knows how to navigate from the stars would just be seen as this babbler, he says, or a stargazer or useless person. And just drawing the distinction between kind of ability to get power and ability to wield power in an effective way. And so kind of modern day parallel, every time there's an election, people talk about like electability versus ability to govern. Goes back a long time. So that's his explanation for why he's seen as useless, is he actually knows all this stuff, but he's not good at like killing other sailors in order to become captain. And again, he makes this point that the sort of this true captain needs to be asked by the sailors to be captain. And he's made a similar point, I think, about judges several books ago. So then he turns to the question of why philosophers are seen as bad. And this is kind of a great explanation because it just like serves to like praise himself even more. He says, well, a philosopher has all these great properties. He's not petty-minded, he's quick at learning, he has a good temper, basically just an all-around stand-up kind of guy. And as a result, someone with all those qualities, as they're growing up, they're like everyone's going to want that person to join the family business, or go be a doctor, or enter all these other pursuits, kind of for their own profit. Like, hey, join. You want to be on our team, you wonderkind. And so he says all these would-be philosophers are kind of tempted away from true philosophy, and this argument doesn't really make a lot of sense. He says that creates vacancies for philosophers. That's not really how supply and demand works, but he says that because there are these job openings for philosophers, all these bad philosophers show up and kind of transfer from other departments or other jobs. In particular, these sophists try to become philosophers. Now, the sophists I guess they're employed as private tutors and gifted in the art of rhetoric. And so they teach their students how to persuade a large crowd of people. And he has this other great extended metaphor about this beast. So he says the sophists kind of know how to handle and speak to and feed the beast in order to get it to comply. And he says the problem with these guys is they conflate what is needed to make the crowd go wild with what the truth is, and they can't tell the difference between the two. They just know how to make the crowd go crazy. And it does kind of, thinking back previously, his whole definition of justice was like, it was like, okay, we need the rational element and spirited element and appetites. Like they shouldn't cross lines. They got to like stay in their own departments. And same thing with the complete guardians, auxiliary guardians, and everybody else. And then he says even within the everybody else, like the shoemaker shouldn't try to become a carpenter. Like they need to stick with what they know. I think this almost puts a like self-interested spin on that, because now he's saying, well, we've got all these sophists and these other guys trying to become philosophers. They're no good at it. They need to stick with what they know. Like, stay away from philosophy, okay? And so, I don't know. Maybe he's just making this argument to kind of protect his value as a philosopher, instead of trying to water it down with all these guys who are claiming to be one. Yeah, and then I guess the last part he talks about like the environment that someone grows up in, and says that if it's worse for someone with a superior nature to grow up in a bad environment than for someone with an inferior nature to do that. And I gave the like Walter White turning into Heisenberg example. I'm not entirely sure what the ramifications of that argument are, but it just kind of more, it's at least in the theme of people kind of turning away from philosophy, and I guess not being good for society when you have all of the best children not becoming philosophers. And then he says, they kind of ask how he escaped either of these fates, or the fate of being bad. He considers himself useless, and he says that the time he grew up in was just so chaotic, he didn't see any point in trying to go into politics or business, because it was just a mess, and so he just kind of stuck with his philosophy, which I thought was an interesting take, and kind of what it takes for people to like get kind of the introverted skills, or skills in things that just require concentration and study, like alone in a room for a long period of time. So then finally he was asked what kinds of constitutions, I think, support philosophers or support philosophy, and that is when I stopped the video, because it had gone on for almost 2 hours. And so that's where we're going to pick up the thread of thought. So, second half of book 6. Open up your Kindle. I am at location 5505. Okay, so Adiamantis says, but which of our present constitutions do you think is suitable for philosophy? Socrates. None of them. But that is exactly my complaint. There is not one city today with a constitution worthy of the philosophic nature. That is precisely why it is perverted and altered. It is like foreign seeds sown in alien ground. It tends to be overpowered and to fade away into the native species. Similarly, the philosophic species does not maintain its own power at present, but declines into a different character. But if it were to find the best constitution as it is itself the best, it would be clear that it is really divine, and that other natures and pursuits are merely human. Wow, now he's calling himself godlike. This is something. Obviously, you are going to ask next what that constitution is. Okay, so the constitution here is just like what political environment does philosophy thrive in, and yeah, he's saying sort of like this foreign seed in the wrong soil, it needs the right environment, otherwise it becomes something else that's not philosophy. Adiamantis. You are wrong there. You see, I was not going to ask that, but whether it was the constitution we described when we were founding our city, or a different one. Okay, this ideal city, is that the one that's ideal for philosophy or not? Socrates. In all other respects, it is that one. But we said even then that there must always be some people in the city who have a rational account of the Constitution, the same one that guided you, the lawgiver, when you made the laws. Okay, so as he's making this ideal city, in most cases, he's just like, oh, well, we'll just let them make their own laws because they'll be smart and know what to do. But occasionally they're like, oh, yeah, we need to strike out this bit of poetry. And so they were kind of playing king as they're building this hypothetical city. So I think he's saying that, yeah, we need somebody with a rational account of the whole thing. Because remember, we're lying to the Guardians. So I think he's saying someone at least needs to know the truth. So that it's not just living in complete ignorance. Someone's got to know what's going on here. Why, like, what lies that we're telling to the Guardians and why about death not being so bad and their golden natures and all that. All right, Adimantus. Yes, we did say that. Socrates. But we did not explain it clearly enough for fear of what our own objections have made clear. Namely, that the demonstration of it would be long and difficult. Indeed, even what remains is not the easiest of all things to discuss. Oh boy, another long and difficult demonstration. What is that? How a city can engage in philosophy without being destroyed. Isn't that the question? You see, all great things are prone to fall, and, as the saying goes, beautiful things are really difficult. And we have this tension between truth and lies here, because he said the philosopher hates all falsehoods. His ideal city, there are falsehoods everywhere. Adiamantus. All the same, the demonstration won't be complete until this has been cleared up. Socrates. If anything prevents that, it won't be lack of willingness, but lack of ability. At any rate, you will see how passionate I am. Look now, in fact, at how passionately and recklessly I'm going to argue that a city should practice philosophy in the opposite way to the present one. Ooh. And I'm not sure if it means the city should be practicing opposite philosophy or I think it's practicing it in another way. Or, I'm not sure if it's the present one. I'm not sure that's the present city or the present version of philosophy. That's what I meant to say. Socrates. At present, those who take it up at all do so as young men, just out of childhood, who have yet to take up household management and money-making. Then, just when they reach the most difficult part, they abandon it and are regarded as the most fully trained philosophers. By the most difficult part, I mean the one concerned with arguments. In later life, if others are engaged in it, and they are invited and deigned to listen to them, they think they have done a lot, since they think this should only be a sideline. And, with a few exceptions, by the time they reach old age they are more thoroughly extinguished than the sun of Heraclitus, since they are never rekindled. Okay, I'm going to look at the footnotes here to figure out exactly what he's talking about. So you got these ones who grow up and I don't know if it's like them dropping out of grad school. It's like, yeah, they get to the dissertation part and like, well, I'm out of here. But then they think, yeah, other people think that they're philosophers. Like, oh, he went to grad school. He didn't finish. 24, i.e. dialectic. Okay, so the one concerned with arguments. It's talking about the dialectic, and then the son of Heraclitus, S-U-N for our listeners not looking at the text right now. Heraclitus' sun was extinguished at night but rekindled the next morning. Oh, okay. Socrates. Entirely the opposite. As young men and children, they should occupy themselves with an education and philosophy suitable to the young. Their bodies are blooming and growing into manhood at this time, and they should take very good care of them, so as to acquire a helper for philosophy. Okay, so I guess they is the children, and them is their bodies. So take care of your bodies, boys and girls. But as they grow older and their soul begins to reach maturity, they should make its exercises more rigorous. Then, I think it's is the soul's exercises. Okay. I'm not sure entirely what that is, because you remember we saw with the musical and physical education, he was saying they both, the end goal for both musical and physical education, and musical education kind of included beauty and rhetoric and all this other stuff, was improving the soul. So I guess kind of all their exercises, mental and physical, they need to amp up as they're reaching maturity. Then, when their strength begins to fail, and they have retired from politics and military service, they should graze freely in the pastures of philosophy, and do nothing else, except as a sideline. I mean those who are going to live happily and, when the end comes, crown the life they have lived with a fitting providence in that other place. Okay, so he's saying, look, these people, you gotta work out, you gotta take care of your body so you can actually live to be an old person. And then the true philosopher here, or at least this city philosopher, is going to need some real-world experience, which I think makes sense. I kind of like it when my professors had jobs in the real world for at least a couple years, so they know how things work. And then I like this part at the end about the end coming and crowning their life with a fitting providence in that other place. I keep thinking back to Cephalus, the guy we met at the very beginning, who's toward the end of his life and living happily and looking forward to, not necessarily looking forward to dying, but not being too afraid of it. He's like, I know it'll be all right in Hades. I haven't done anything wrong. So that, I don't know. I still think he might be the true philosopher of the book, the real hero. Adeimantus. You seem to be arguing with real passion, Socrates, but I am sure that most of your hearers will oppose you with even greater passion and won't be convinced in the least, beginning with Thrasymachus. Oh, I haven't seen him in a little while. Socrates, please do not try to raise a quarrel between me and Thrasymachus, just as we have become friends. Not that we were enemies before. Ah. Okay, so I wonder when exactly they became friends. So, remember, Thrasymachus kind of had the most interesting dialogue, at least at the literary level, because he presented his argument that justice is the advantage of the stronger, and then he kind of just wanted to leave it alone. Like, he wanted to leave the dinner party, but then Socrates is like, no, you have to stay, and I have to rebut you. And he's just like, okay, fine. And then kind of goes along with what Socrates says, but then Glaucon's not really happy with Thrasymachus. It's like submitting like that. And so the esoteric interpretation that I gave you in books 1 through 5 is that maybe Thrasymachus was right all along. And Socrates was, in books 3 through 5, is providing the missing piece in Thrasymachus's argument. And that was we need to prevent faction in the society where everything kind of accrues to the stronger, to the advantage of the stronger. And so is that how they become friends? Is that that might be my esoteric version of when they became friends, is when Socrates kind of provides the missing piece in Thrasymachus's philosophy. Yeah, I don't know. Or maybe it was, otherwise I don't know how they became friends. So you remember with Polemarchus ultimately submitted to Socrates and just said, yes, I will go to battle with you, Socrates. And Thrasymachus was just he was just a little bit listless or agreeable, but not like, oh yeah, Socrates, I'm totally convinced. He's just like, yeah, okay, I guess that argument is right. Can I leave now? So I don't know. Maybe this is how they became friends. All right, I'll keep going. You see, we won't relax our efforts until we convince him and the others, or at least do something that may benefit them in a later incarnation when, reborn, they happen upon these arguments again. So it's like, okay, I love this. He's like, all right, I'm going to make some great arguments here. He might not be convinced now, but in a future life, he'll read about me. He'll read Plato's Republic and be convinced. I think it's great when somebody, they know the thing that they're working on is so good that future generations are going to appreciate it. I think, what is it, Horace, he was a Roman poet. One of his famous poem was he's like, I have erected monuments, and these things aren't going away. Kanye West also likes to do the same thing and talk about how his works will be known 1,000 years hence. Adeimantus. You are talking about the short term, I see. Socrates. It is certainly nothing compared to the whole of time. However, it is no wonder that the masses are not convinced by our arguments. I mean, they have never seen a man that matched our plan, though they have more often seen words purposely chosen to rhyme with one another than just happening to do so, as in the present case. So I think he's making a joke here, because he's saying these other... Alright, I'm going to look at the note here. Note 27. Come on, Kindle app. Plato is mocking the rhetoricians who were fond of forced rhyme. His own words were, Ugar popate iedon genomenon tu non legamenon. They've never seen anything come into existence that matches our account to exhibit the phenomenon he is mocking. Okay, so he's saying Plato used a rhyme in the original, and then the translator used a rhyme. So Plato's rhyming genomenon, so I think that's the thing coming into existence, it's like genome, to the legomenon, which I think refers to words. And I only say that because there's this thing in the if a word only appears once in the Bible, it's called a hapax legomenon. I learned that in like my 9th grade Old Testament class. And so, yeah, so I think that's legomenon's the account. Anyway, so he's rhyming genomenon with legomenon and making fun of the people who use forced rhymes. But he's actually using a kind of a forced rhyme there. And then, here's the real joke. Here's the meta joke. Thank you, C.D.C. Reeve. Did you catch that? Exhibit the phenomenon he is mocking. So Reeve puts in his own rhyme there. Not only did Reeve put in his rhyme, because he rhymed a man, a plan, a canal, but he rhymes with genomenon and legomenon. What a clever guy. All the fun's in the footnotes. Same thing if you ever read History of the Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire. There's so many jokes in the footnotes. It's so much. It's great. It's a blast. All right. Okay. So, what is the point he's actually saying here? Okay. Yeah, they've never seen the man match the plan, or the genomenon match the legomenon. So they haven't actually seen something in reality that matches the theory or the thing that people are talking about. Okay, but a man who, as far as possible, matched and rhymed with virtue in word and deed, and wielded dynastic power in a city of the same type. That is something they have never seen even once. Or do you think they have? Ah, okay. Beautiful words, beautiful deeds, in wielding dynastic power. That's all we want in a leader. Is that so much to ask? No, they definitely have not. Nor, bless you, have they spent enough time listening to fine and free arguments that vigorously seek the truth in every way, so as to acquire knowledge and keep their distance from all the sophistries and heuristic quibbles that, whether in public trials or private gatherings, strive for nothing except reputation and disputation. Okay, so they haven't spent enough time listening to the real arguments, these fine and free arguments, and not these sophistries. And you remember, the heuristic is you're just trying to win the argument, you're not actually seeking after truth. Yeah. They need to listen to the real philosophers. No, they have not. Socrates. It was for these reasons, because we foresaw these difficulties, that we were afraid. At the same time, we were compelled by the truth to say that no city, no constitution, and no individual man will ever become perfect until some chance event compels those few philosophers who are not vicious, the ones who are now called useless, to take care of a city, whether they are willing to or not, and compels the city to obey them. Or until a true passion for true philosophy flows by some divine inspiration into the sons of the men now wielding dynastic power or sovereignty, or into the men themselves. Now, it cannot be reasonably maintained in my view that either or both of these things is impossible. But if they were, we would be justly ridiculed for indulging in wistful thinking. Isn't that so? Okay, so I think he's just trying to show that it's at least possible for this philosopher to take power. Um, and, okay, so yeah, he's saying, so before we said, the city will never be perfect until we get the true philosopher to take care of the city, and then now he's going to maintain that it's not impossible for that to happen. Okay, so either the philosopher comes to power, or the guy who's in power discovers philosophy. One of those two things needs to happen. Adimantus, it is. Socrates. Then if, in the limitless past, some necessity forced those who were foremost in philosophy to take charge of a city, or is doing so now in some barbaric place far beyond our ken, or will do so in the future, this is something we are prepared to fight about. Our argument that the Constitution we have described has existed, does exist, and will exist at any rate whenever it is that the muse of philosophy gains mastery of a city. It is not impossible for this to happen, so we are not speaking of impossibilities. That it is difficult, we agree ourselves. Okay, so this is interesting. So he's saying if philosophy takes mastery of a city, then we have then we have the Constitution that we want. And I guess if you're a true philosopher, then you'll follow Socrates' argument exactly in books 3 through 5 and make this ideal city. I think that's what he means. What's interesting to me here is the mention of this barbaric place far beyond our ken. He's saying it's possible that it's already happened or will happen in the barbaric place. Now think about this. Why is that interesting? When did we talk about barbarians most recently? Anybody remember? That's in book 5. When he's kind of talking about the Melian dialogue or referring to the siege of Milos, he's saying, okay, look, Greeks shouldn't be pillaging other Greeks. We shouldn't be burning down each other's houses. But barbarians, do whatever you want. Now, the problem with that, in my esoteric reading, is that we have this argument from Book 1 that we don't really know who our friends and enemies are because our people we think of as our enemies might actually be good and really should be our friends. And he's even admitting now, so he basically ignored that argument for the next 4 books. And now this argument's coming back that the barbarians might actually be okay. Like, they might actually be true philosophers and be running just cities. But our city is just attacking them anyway. Like, the ideal city that is Greek is not evaluating these barbarian cities and saying, like, oh, are these run by philosophers? If so, we're not going to attack them. They're just like, no, we got a luxurious lifestyle to support here. We need commodious living. We're going to just take your stuff and burn your houses. We don't care if you're run by a philosopher or not. So that's why that bit is interesting. That kind of counter argument comes back. So I don't know. Like this somewhat, so like if you were willing to take these little hints, I think this would support my esoteric interpretation. That maybe the bad guys are the good guys, and maybe this ideal city ain't so good after all. Okay, so he's saying it's at least. Yeah, it's not impossible. It's difficult for this to happen, but it could happen. Philosophy ascendant. Adiamantus. I certainly think so. Socrates. But the masses do not. Is that what you're going to say? They probably don't. Bless you. You should not make such wholesale charge against the masses. They will surely come to hold a different belief if, instead of wanting to win a victory at their expense, you soothe them and try to remove their slanderous prejudice against the love of learning. You must show them what you mean by philosophers and define their nature in pursuit the way we did just now. Okay, so now he's talking about... Okay, so I guess he's saying, oh, you're probably going to say the masses don't understand this. He's like, yeah, probably not. He's like, no, don't insult the masses like that. We got to kind of butter up the masses so that they will think of philosophy a little bit better. Remove that slanderous prejudice against the love of learning, i.e. philosophy. They will then realize you do not mean the same people that they do. So again, he's saying, I've just shown you why philosophy has a bad reputation with these as being bad or useless, but use these arguments, and more importantly, use these images. So in kind of both cases, he had an image to show why philosophy was not being understood correctly. So it wasn't just pure reason. Okay, and if they once see it that way, I guess with the new image, like with the ship owner, even you will say that they have a different opinion from the one you just attributed to them, and will answer differently. Or do you think that anyone who is gentle and without malice is harsh to one who is not harsh, or malicious to one who is not malicious? So I think what he's saying here is the average person, if as a you're a philosopher, go easy on the masses. Don't be harsh to the masses, because then they'll be kind of harsh back to you. Or at least if you're not harsh to them, then they won't be harsh to you. So he says, I will anticipate you, and say that I think a few people may have such a harsh character, i.e. be harsh on philosophy, but not the majority. So it's like, just don't insult the people, they won't be mad at you. It's kind of like running for office. Never attack the voters. that is the surest way to lose an election, is attacking the voters. Adeimantus. And I agree, of course. Socrates. Then don't you also agree that the harshness of the masses toward philosophy is caused by those outsiders who do not belong, and who have burst in like a band of revelers, abusing one another, indulging their love of quarreling, and always arguing about human beings, something that is least appropriate in philosophy? So I think he's talking about these sophists again, who are like taking the jobs of honest philosophers. I do indeed. For surely, Adeimantus, someone whose mind is truly directed toward the things that are, has not the leisure to look down at human affairs, and be filled with malice and hatred as a result of entering into their disputes. That's kind of weird. He's been talking about human affairs this whole time, but he might... I guess he's talking maybe more specifically about, like, oh yeah, his goat came over to my backyard and ate all my stuff. It's like the true philosopher doesn't have time for that. Instead, as he looks at and contemplates things that are orderly and always the same, that neither do injustice to one another nor suffer it, being all in a rational order, he imitates them and tries to become as like them as he can. Or do you think there is any way to prevent someone from associating with something he admires without imitating it? Okay, so this imitation stuff, I think he's saying the philosopher is pondering, like, beautiful objects all the time, and therefore, and like, rationality and orderliness, and therefore he comes to imitate those things. This passage, I don't think this agrees with what he just said was the ideal philosopher. Like, he said the city philosopher needs to have a normal education growing up, and then spend a life in politics or military service, and then have their mind graze in the pastures of philosophy as they become weak. So it seems like they spend most of their life dealing with these human affairs, like politics and military. They're just doing all this planning or resolving disputes. And I don't think they're spending all their time pondering rationality and imitating it. So I don't know how you get out of that one. Okay, he can't possibly, says Adeimantus. Then the philosopher, by associating with what is orderly and divine, becomes as divine and orderly as a human being can. Though, mind you, there are always plenty of slanders around. Okay, so maybe it's just when they're in old age and becoming philosophers. That's when they become orderly and divine, and forget about all those petty disputes they had to deal with before. Adeimantus, absolutely. And if he should come to be compelled to make a practice, in private and in public, of stamping what he sees there into the people's characters, instead of shaping only his own, do you think he will be a poor craftsman of temperance, justice, and the whole of popular virtue? Not at all. Okay, so I guess he's trying to change other people and make them more temperate and just. Usually not a good plan. We'll see. We'll see how he does this. And when the masses realize that what we are saying about him is true, will they be harsh with philosophers, or mistrust us when we say that there is no way a city can ever find happiness unless its plan is drawn by painters who use the divine model? Okay, so the masses need to... they need to be persuaded that the philosophers are the real deal here, which doesn't seem easy, given, like, they have these misconceptions, but Socrates is like, okay, here's what you say, here's how you get rid of those misconceptions. But then in the last page, he even says there are always plenty of slanders around. Like, these slanders aren't going away, so I don't know how the masses are really going to believe all this about the philosopher, who just seems to be wanting to become king. And there's the painter analogy again. The philosopher kind of sees truly, or sees the true divine model and paints from that, whereas everybody else is finger painting. Adeimantus. They won't be harsh if they do realize this. But what sort of drawing do you mean? They would take the city, says Socrates, and people's characters as their sketching slate. Uh-oh. But first they would wipe it clean. Oh boy. Which is not at all an easy thing to do. Okay, jeez, this is like the Men in Black memory programming. It's just like, whoop, everything you know, it's going away. We need to give you a little reboot, a little ECT. And you should be aware that this is an immediate difference between them and others. That they refuse to take either a private individual or a city in hand, or to write its laws, unless they receive a clean slate or are allowed to clean it themselves. Jeez. I don't know. This sounds like it might be getting kind of violent. It's like you have to just change everyone's minds. Clean their minds yourself. How is that going to happen? Oh, man. I mean, this is sort of the oldest lesson in politics, is you can't change human nature. Good luck, Socrates. And rightly so. And after all, after that, says Socrates, don't you think they would draw the plan of the Constitution? Of course. And I suppose that, as they work, they would look often in each direction. On the one hand, toward what is in its nature just, beautiful, temperate, and all the rest. And on the other, toward what they are trying to put into human beings, mixing and blending pursuits, to produce a human likeness, based on the one that Homer too called divine and godly when it appeared among human beings. Is he really saying he has to make the humans more divine? This is never going to work. Oh man. All right, we'll see where it goes, but I can't take this part seriously at all. Okay, I'll look at the footnote. It's probably just telling us where in Homer he said this. Yeah, the Iliad somewhere or other. Adeimantus, right. Socrates. They would erase one thing, I suppose, and draw in another until they had made people's characters as dear to the gods as possible. Can you imagine this? The philosopher takes power and he's like, okay, I'm just going to make everyone more divine now. It's like, that guy'd get thrown out of office. Adeimantus. At any rate, the drawing would be most beautiful that way. Whew. And this is an interesting relationship between kind of beauty and power. So we had beauty and morality equated earlier. It's like, oh, they have beautiful speech if whatever is in their soul is also beautiful. But now it's like, you might be doing, this could be an awful thing. Like trying to change human nature and wipe the slate clean. Like that could mean a lot of things. But it's in the name of beauty. So I don't know. It could almost be this like aestheticization of violence. Socrates. Are we at all persuading the people you said were rushing to attack us then, that the philosopher we were praising to them is really the sort of painter of constitutions? They were angry because we are entrusting cities to him. Are they any calmer at hearing it now? Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. Like, oh yeah, we're going to put this useless guy in charge. No, I don't want that. Actually, he's going to reprogram all of your minds. I don't know. They will be much calmer if they have any sense, says Adeimantus. Socrates. After all, how could they possibly dispute it? Will they deny that philosophers are lovers of both what is and of the truth? That would be silly. Okay. Or that their nature, as we have described it, is akin to the best? And again, Socrates gave us the counter-argument in Book 1. Like, the philosopher could go insane, and now we have an insane person treating all of our minds as a clean slate that he's going to be painting on. They cannot deny that either. Or that such a nature, when it happens to find appropriate pursuits, will not be as completely good and philosophic as any other? Or are they going to claim that the people we excluded are more so? Certainly not. Will they still be angry, then, when we say that until the philosopher class gains mastery of a city, there will be no respite from evils for either city or citizens, and the constitution we have been describing in our discussion will never be completed in practice? They will probably be less so. So, yeah, okay. We tell them philosopher needs to be in charge of the city, or there will be no respite from evils. And this beautiful constitution, this ideal city, will never be realized. If it's all right with you, then, let's not say that they will be simply less angry, but they will become altogether gentle and persuaded, so that out of shame, if nothing else, they will agree. This is not plausible. Sadimantis, all right. So let's assume that they have been convinced of this. Will anyone contend, then, that there is no chance that the offspring of kings or men in power could be natural-born philosophers? Yeah, because he's also spent all this time talking about how the masses are persuaded by the sophists, and how the things that persuade the masses are not the truth, because the sophists confuse kind of their rhetorical tools with the truth. And now he's saying, oh, but I can use this truth to actually persuade the masses. But if that were the case, then the sophists would be using that as their truth, and they probably would have persuaded the masses already, because that's how they make their money. Something seems fishy about this. Okay, Adimantus, all right. So the natural-born philosophers. Adimantus, no one could. Okay, so there is a chance the offspring of the king could be a natural-born philosopher. So we have the two paths to philosophy taking power. Either the philosopher is given power, or the person in power discovers philosophy. Socrates, could anyone claim that if such offspring are born, they must inevitably be corrupted? We agree ourselves that it is difficult for them to be saved, but that in the whole of time, not one of them could be saved. Could anyone contend that? Okay, so earlier in Book 6, he was saying, like, oh yeah, you have these natural-born philosophers, but they get corrupted by their environment. But he's saying, well, at least one, in the whole of, in the infinity of time, at least one of these guys will come out okay, and we'll get someone who's born to power who also happens to be a great philosopher. Adimantus, of course not. But surely, the occurrence of one such individual is enough, provided his city obeys him, to bring to completion all the things that now seem so incredible. And this is interesting because he's really speaking to eternity here. Like, he kind of knows his book is going to be read in the future, because he's sort of appealing to the vanity of future kings and future princes, saying like, oh yeah, here I am, Plato, just 1,000 years ago, wishing that one of you kings would read philosophy and become the perfect philosopher king. And I don't know, I'd be, if I were a prince, I'd be interested to read that. It's like, oh yeah, what am I the chosen one? Am I Neo? Yes, one is enough. Just the one. For I suppose that, if a ruler established the laws and practices as we have described, it is hardly impossible that the citizens would be willing to carry them out. Yeah, what's not to like about his eugenics program? Adimantus, not at all. Would it either be surprising or impossible, then, that the others should think as we do? I don't suppose so. But I think our earlier discussion was sufficient to show that these arrangements are best provided they are possible. Indeed it was. It seems, then, that the conclusion we have now reached about legislation is that the one we are describing is best provided it is possible, and that while it is difficult for it to come about, it certainly is not impossible. Adimantus. Yes, that is the conclusion we have reached. Socrates. Now that this conclusion has, with much effort, been reached, we must next deal with the remaining issues. In what way, by means of what subjects and pursuits, the saviors of our constitution will come to exist, and at what ages they will take up each of them. Okay. Okay, so when the person who's born a king takes up philosophy, maybe both of them. I don't know. Yes, we must deal with that. Socrates. I gain nothing by my cleverness, then, in omitting from our earlier discussion the troublesome topic of acquiring women, begetting children, and establishing rulers, because I knew the whole truth would provoke resentment and would be difficult to bring about. Acquiring women and begetting children. As it turned out, the need to discuss them arose anyway. Now, the subject of women and children has already been discussed. But that of the rulers has to be taken up again from the beginning. So I think... Okay, I think when he's talking about the guardian class, and we had equality in the workplace, and then women joining the military, and then abolishing the family, and not knowing who your real kids are, etc. I think that's what he's talking about, among the ideal guardians. Okay, we said, if you remember, that they must show themselves to be lovers of the city, when tested by pleasures and pains, by not abandoning this conviction through labors, fears, and all other adversities. I think he's talking about the passage where he's like, these guardians need to be tested when they're kids, and then tested as adolescents, and if they pass the psychological test at all stages of life, then they are deemed to be virtuous and put in charge of the city. And then, you remember, that's when I pointed out, you could also come up with, the evil city, where you, test for total psychopaths at all stages in life. And you're like, okay, this guy's a real sociopath, serial killer. We want him in our evil organization. And I would see a movie about that. Anyone who was incapable of doing so was to be rejected, while anyone who always came through pure, like gold tested in a fire, was made to be ruler, and receive gifts and prizes, both while he lived and after his death. These were the sorts of things we were saying while our argument veiled its face and slipped by, for fear of stirring up the very problems that now confront us. Okay, you remember that passage. That's absolutely true, I do remember. Socrates. I was reluctant, my friend, to say the things we have now dared to say anyway. But now, let's also dare to say that we must establish philosophers as guardians in the most exact sense. So they're not just the king as we know them. I think they are the complete guardians that we came to know in 3 through 5. Adimantus, let's do so. Bear in mind, then, says Socrates, that there will probably be only a few of them. You see, they have to have the nature we described, and its parts rarely consent to grow together in one person. Rather, its many parts grow split off from one another. Adimantus, how do you mean? Ease of learning, good memory, astuteness, and smartness, as you know, and all the other things that go along with them, such as youthful passion and high-mindedness, are rarely willing to grow together simultaneously with a disposition to live an orderly, quiet, and completely stable life. On the contrary, those who possess the former traits are carried by their quick wits wherever chance leads them and have no stability at all. Isn't that interesting? Okay, so if you're got a quick mind and youthful passion, you're just kind of flitting all over the place, and you don't really want to settle down and have an orderly, quiet, and stable life. You're just like, I got this great mind. I can go out in the world and have a bunch of adventures. That's true, says Adimantus. Socrates. Those with stable characters, on the other hand, who do not change easily, I guess like the accountants, whom one would employ because of their greater reliability, and who in battle are not easily moved by fears, act in the same way when it comes to their studies. They are hard to get moving and learn with difficulty, as if they are anesthetized, and are constantly falling asleep and yawning whenever they have to work hard at such things. I don't actually... This is not really compatible with my practical experience about people. I don't think people who don't change easily and are reliable and are not moved by fear in battle, I don't think they'd fall asleep while they're trying to study things necessarily. But I don't know. If you're that kind of person, let us know in the comments. Adimantus, they are. Socrates. Yet we say that someone must have a good and fine share of both characters, or he won't receive the truest education or honor, or be allowed to rule. Does this remind you of anything? Two sorts of qualities that are not found in the same person. We saw this before, I think in book 2 or I think book 3, maybe 2 or 3, when he's talking about the guardians. He says it's very hard to find someone who's both spirited in battle and then kind of a nice person to his own family or his own city. And that kind of the fiercest warriors might be tyrants at home. And you recall he had a resolution to it, which was the dog. As the dog is friendly toward people that the dog knows and mean toward strangers, that shows that the dog has the love of learning, and therefore if the guardians have a love of learning, they will have both of these properties. So we have just kind of another sort of a parallel situation here, and I'm not sure how he's going to resolve it. Unless he just says, oh, well, they love philosophy, so they have all the characteristics needed. Adeimantus, that's right. Then don't you think this will rarely occur? Of course. He must be tested, then, in the labors, fears, and pleasures we mentioned before. He must also be exercised in many other subjects, however, which we did not mention, but are adding now, to see whether his nature can endure the most important subjects or shrink from them, like the cowards who shrink from the other tests. Those darn cowards. Adeimantus, it is certainly important to find that out. But what do you mean by the greatest subjects? Socrates, do you remember when we distinguished 3 kinds of things in the soul in order to help bring out what justice, temperance, courage, and wisdom each is? I remember. Adeimantus, if I didn't, I would not deserve to hear the rest. Isn't that interesting? So, this might be another kind of case for esoteric reading, or at least philosophic reading, where he's saying if you don't remember that part of the argument, you should just put the book down right now. You need to be paying attention to this book to be worthy of reaching the conclusions. Isn't that cool? Socrates, do you also remember what preceded it? No, what? We said, I believe, that in order to get the finest view of these matters, we would need to take a longer road, which would make them plain to anyone who took it, but that it was possible to give demonstrations that would be up to the standard of the previous discussion. All of you said that was enough. The result was that our subsequent discussion, as it seemed to me, was less than exact. But whether or not it satisfied all of you is for you to say. Did it satisfy you or not? Are you satisfied with that account of justice in books 1 through 5? Or do you think maybe there are some holes in it that should lead us to some other conclusions? Adeimantus, I, at any rate, thought you gave us good measure, and so apparently did the others. No, my friend, any measure of such things that falls short in any way of what is not good measure at all, since nothing incomplete is a measure of anything. Some people, however, are occasionally of the opinion that an incomplete treatment is already adequate, and there is no need for further inquiry. Adeimantus, yes, a lot of people think like that, feel like that. Laziness is the cause. Socrates, well, that is a feeling that is least appropriate in a guardian of a city and its laws. Yeah, you guys were let this less than exact account slip by. You're not true guardians. Adeimantus, no doubt. Socrates, he will have to take the longer road then, comrade, and put no less effort into learning than into physical training. For otherwise, as we were just saying, he will never pursue the greatest and most appropriate subject to the end. Okay. Taking the long road. This is a Rocky of the mind. Adeimantus, why aren't these virtues the greatest things? Is there something yet greatest than justice and the other virtues we discussed? Not only is it greatest, says Socrates, but even in the case of the virtues themselves, it is not enough to look at a mere sketch as we are doing now, while neglecting the most finished portrait. I mean, it is ridiculous, isn't it, to strain every nerve to attain the utmost exactness and clarity about other things of little value, while not treating the greatest things as meriting the most exactness? Okay, gonna take a long road again. Adimantus, it certainly is. But do you think that anyone is going to let you off without asking you what you mean by this greatest subject and what it is concerned with? That's what I... Yeah, what the heck are you talking about? Are you talking about philosophy this whole time? Socrates, no, I do not. You may ask it too. You certainly have heard the answer often, but now either you are not thinking or you intend to make trouble for me again by interrupting. And I suspect it is more the latter. You see, you have often heard it said that the form of the good is the greatest thing to learn about, and that it is by their relation to it that just things and the others become useful and beneficial. So I guess the form of the good is the greatest thing. So this might... I don't think he's talking about aesthetics. He's talking about the good here. Okay. And now you must be pretty certain that that is what I am going to say, and in addition, that we have no adequate knowledge of it. Uh-oh. And if we do not know it, you know that even the fullest possible knowledge of other things is of no benefit to us, any more than if we acquire any possession without the good. Or do you think there is any benefit in possessing everything but the good? Or to know everything without knowing the good, thereby knowing nothing fine or good? Okay, so he says the greatest thing to know is the good, as distinct from the just, and we don't know nothing about it. And knowledge of anything else is kind of worthless if we don't know what the good is. I think that's what he means. Adimantus, no, by Zeus, I do not. Socrates, furthermore, you also know that the masses believe pleasure to be the good, while the more refined believe it to be knowledge. Adimantus, of course. And my friend, that those who believe this cannot show us what sort of knowledge it is, but in the end are forced to say that it is knowledge of the good. Okay, so I guess there's some circular, people are like, yeah, you know, it's not pleasure that's good, it's knowledge. It's like, well, which knowledge? Well, knowledge of the good. It's like, knowledge of knowledge? How does that work? Which is completely ridiculous, says Adimantus. How could it not be, when they blame us for not knowing the good, and then turn around and talk to us as if we did know it? I mean, they say it is knowledge of the good, as if we understood what they mean when they utter the word good. Yeah, people are always talking about the good. I don't know what it is. That's absolutely true. What about those who define the good as pleasure? Are they any less full of confusion than the others? Or aren't they even they forced to admit that there are bad pleasures? Most definitely. I suppose it follows, doesn't it, that they have to admit that the same things are both good and bad. Okay, so now it's almost like we're rebooting the discussion. So kind of books 1 through 6.5 here were about justice, and now we're talking about the nature of the good. Because it is the greatest thing to know about. So I guess we're diving in, although we're most of the way through this book. I'm not sure if this is I'm not sure if the long road is the nature of the good or what's going on here. Okay, Adimantus, it certainly does. So things can be both good and bad. Isn't it clear, then, that there are lots of serious disagreements about the good? Of course. Well, isn't it also clear that many people would choose things that are believed to be just or beautiful, even if they are not, and would acquire things, and form beliefs accordingly? Okay, so I guess people are deceived about things that are just or beautiful, because they're going to choose those things that seem to be that way, even if they're not, and acquire and form beliefs based on kind of this false knowledge. Yet no one is satisfied to acquire things that are believed to be good. On the contrary, everyone seeks the things that are good. In this area, everyone disdains mere reputation. Okay, so I think what he's saying here, it's like, if you're going to buy a painting, you kind of care what other people think. Like, you don't care if it's truly beautiful as long as other people think that it's beautiful. But for things that are good in your life, like, you want it actually to be good, not just for other people to think so, is what he's saying. Adimantus. Right. Socrates. That, then, is what every soul pursues, and for its sake does everything. The soul has a hunch that the good is something, but it is puzzled and cannot adequately grasp just what it is or acquire the sort of stable belief about it that it has about the other things, so it misses the benefit, if any, that even those other things may give. Are we to accept, then, that even the best people in the city, to whom we entrust everything, must remain thus in the dark about something of this kind and importance? Okay, so he's just like immediately giving up on what the good is or can be. And even the best people don't know what the good is. That's the last thing we would do. Wait, what are we actually doing? Okay, we're not going to accept. We're not going to accept that the best people remain in the dark about the good because it's so important. Socrates, anyway, I imagine that just and beautiful things won't have acquired much of a guardian in someone who does not even know why they are good. And I have a hunch that no one will have adequate knowledge of them until he knows this. Okay. And that because we also need to know, because we just started asking what justice is. We didn't actually ask why we wanted justice. So I think he's saying, you know, we need some kind of normative statement here, not just what is justice this, is justice that. It's like, well, why do we care about justice in the first place? So I think we got to say, like, justice is the good. That's a good hunch. But won't our Constitution be perfectly ordered if such a guardian, one who knows these things, oversees it? It is bound to be. But you yourself, Socrates, do you say the good is knowledge or pleasure, or is it something else altogether? What a man! I bet it's justice. You made it good and clear long ago that other people's opinions about these matters would not satisfy you. Edemontus, well, Socrates, it does not seem right to me for you to be willing to state other people's convictions, but not your own, when you have spent so much time occupied with these matters. What? Do you think it is right to speak about things you do not know, as if you do know them? Ah, yeah, he's like, okay, because Socrates he's been kind of hard to pin down on a lot of things. Okay, so he's saying, it's like, maybe he is speaking about things he doesn't know about. I know nothing. I guess that is his most famous line. Edemontus, not as if you know them, but you ought to be willing to state what you believe as what you believe. What? Haven't you noticed that beliefs without knowledge are all shameful and ugly things, since the best of them are blind? Do you think that those who have a true belief without understanding are any different from blind people who happen to travel the right road? Yeah. They are no different. It's like if you, I don't know, if you ever buy stocks and you like buy a stock for the wrong reason and it goes up for another reason, you're just like, yep, that's knew it all along. I always enjoy being right for the wrong reason. I'm okay being a blind person traveling the right road. They are no different. Do you want to look at shameful, blind, and crooked things then, when you might hear fine, illuminating ones from other people? And Glaucon said, so we're kind of breaking out of the narrative a little bit, by Zeus, Socrates, do not stop now with the end in sight, so to speak. We will be satisfied if you discuss the good, the way you discussed justice, temperance, and the rest. Yeah, please, give us a full disquisition. Socrates, that, comrade, would well satisfy me too, but I'm afraid I won't be up to it, and that I will disgrace myself and look ridiculous by trying. You're supposed to know everything, Socrates. No, bless you. Let's set aside what the good itself is for the time being. Yeah, there's not enough room in this, or not enough time in this chapter, or this book, for it. You see, even to arrive at my current beliefs about it seems beyond the range of our present discussion. But I am willing to tell you about what seems to be an offspring of the good and most like it, if that is agreeable to you, or otherwise to let the matter drop. Glaucon, tell us then. The story about the father remains a debt you will pay another time. So the father being the good. Socrates, I wish I could repay it, and you recover the debt, instead of just the interest. So here then is the child and offspring of the good itself. But take care I do not somehow deceive you unintentionally by giving you an illegitimate account of the child. Ooh. Take care I do not deceive you unintentionally. So here's kind of deceit showing up again in reference to the philosopher. Is it a hint? I don't know. We will take as much care as possible, so speak on. I will once I have come to an agreement with you and reminded you of things we've already said here as well as on many other occasions. Oh boy. Which things? We say that there are many beautiful, many good, and many other such things, thereby distinguishing them in words. We do. We also say there's a beautiful itself and a good itself, and it's the philosopher who sees those things. And so, in the case of all the things that we then posited as many, we reverse ourselves and posit a single form belonging to each, since we suppose that there is a single one, and call it what each is. That's true. And we say, okay, so there's an abstract beauty and an abstract justice and an abstract goodness. And we say that the one class of things is visible but not intelligible, while the forms are intelligible but not visible. Okay, here comes Plato's theory of the forms. It's an important contribution to philosophy for many thousand years. Falcon, absolutely. With what of ours do we see visible things? With our sight. And don't we hear audible things with hearing and perceive all other perceptible things with our other senses? Of course. Have you ever thought about how lavish the craftsman of our senses was in making the power to see and be seen? No, not really. Yeah. It's like, do you ever consider how complex the human eye is? Nah. Well, think of it this way. Do hearing and sound need another kind of thing in order for the former to hear and the latter to be heard? A third thing, in whose absence the one won't hear or the other be heard? Don't you need a brain somewhere in there? Falcon, no. And I think there cannot be many, not to say any, others that need such a thing. Or can you think of one? No, I cannot. Or don't you need air? I don't know. Whatever. A third thing. Aren't you aware that sight and the visible realm have such a need? In what way? Surely sight may be present in the eyes, and its possessor may try to use it, and colors may be present in things. But unless a third kind of thing is present, I guess light, photons, which is naturally adapted for this specific purpose, you know that sight will see nothing and the colors will remain unseen. What kind of thing do you mean? The kind you call light. You are right. So, it is no insignificant form of yoke, then, that yokes the sense of sight and the power to be seen. In fact, it is more honorable than any that yokes other yoked teams, provided, of course, that light is not something without honor. What? Okay. It's more honorable than any that yokes other yoked teams. So, light is a yoke. A zeugma, if you will. I think that's like the one Greek word that I know. Okay. Light is... So, it's... You know, the yoke is the thing they put on the cattle or the mules or whatever. And it's kind of in charge of these things. So he's saying that this is an honorable one, I guess, because it's enabling sight. But other yokes might be used for, I don't know, enslaving and are not honorable. Glaucon, and it is surely far from being without honor. Socrates, which of the gods in the heavens would you say is the controller of this? The one whose light makes our sight see best, invisible things best seen. Okay. Yeah, who's the god of light? Is it going to be, what is it, Photus? The very one you and others would name. I mean, it is clear the one you were asking about is the sun. Helios, the sun, was considered a god. And isn't sight naturally related to that god in the following way? Which one? Neither sight itself nor that in which it comes to be, namely the eye, is the sun. Okay, so the third thing is the sun. No, it is not. But it is, I think, the most sun-like of the sense organs. This is getting a little stupid, but okay. By far the most. And doesn't it receive the power it has from the sun, just like an influx from an overflowing treasury? Certainly. The sun is not sight either, yet, as its cause, isn't it seen by sight itself? Yeah, you can look at the sun. Glaucon, it is. Let's say, then, that this is what I call the offspring of the good, which the good begot, as its analog. What the latter is in the intelligible realm in relation to understanding and intelligible things, the former is in the visible realm in relation to sight invisible things. Okay, so the former is the offspring, and the good is the father. So he's saying he's trying to understand the visible world because that's the offspring of the invisible world. And now we're going to try to understand the good, which is invisible. Well, Glaucon's asking him to tell me more. Glaucon, how? Tell me more. Socrates, you know that when our eyes no longer turn to things whose colors are illuminated by the light of day, but by the lights of night, they are dimmed and seem nearly blind, as if clear sight were no longer in them. Of course. Yet I suppose that whenever they are turned to things illuminated by the suns, they see clearly, and sight is manifest in those very same eyes? Indeed. Socrates, well, think about the soul in the same way. When it focuses on something that is illuminated both by truth and what is, it understands, knows, and manifestly possesses understanding. But when it focuses on what is mixed with obscurity, on what comes to be and passes away, it believes and is dimmed, changes its beliefs this way and that, and seems bereft of understanding. Yes, it does seem like that. Okay, so this is the soul seeing truth, somehow. You must say, then, that what gives truth to the things known and the power to know to the knower is the form of the good. So I guess the form of the good is like the object. So you need both the object and you need light. And so you need the form of the good and you need something. And as the cause of knowledge and truth, you must think of it as an object of knowledge. Both knowledge and truth are beautiful things. But if you are to think correctly, you must think of the good as other and more beautiful than they. In the visible realm, light and sight are rightly thought to be sun-like, but wrongly thought to be the sun. So here it is right to think of knowledge and truth as good-like, but wrong to think that either of them is the good, for the status of the good is yet more honorable. Okay, so the good is the sun that shines light on knowledge and truth, I guess. Glaucon, it is an incredibly beautiful thing you are talking about, if it provides both knowledge and truth, but it is itself superior to them in beauty. I mean, you surely do not think that it could be pleasure. No words of ill omen, please, says Socrates. Instead, examine our analogy in more detail. How? The sun, I think you would say, not only gives visible things the power to be seen, but also provides for their coming to be, growth, and nourishment, although it is not itself coming to be. Okay, so I don't know. Maybe this is where Hegel got started. So the sun is eternal, but it makes things come in and out of existence. Glaucon, I would. Therefore, you should also say that not only do the objects of knowledge owe their being known to the good, but their existence and being are also due to it. Although the good is not being, but something yet beyond being, superior to it in rank and power. Okay, so it's like the sun, because everything comes from the sun. Like, we both get our energy from the sun in a very literal way, but also we can see things because of the sun, and in that way, the good not only makes objects of knowledge come into being, and lets us understand them, I guess. And Glaucon quite ridiculously replied, "By Apollo, what demonic hyperbole!" 37. Socrates' claim ends with the words denumei huper econtis, superior in power. Glaucon responds with the punning daimoniis hyperboles, hence the joke. Times like this, it'd be cool to know the original. Oh well. Socrates, it's your own fault. You forced me to tell my beliefs about it. And don't you stop either, says Glaucon. At least not until you have finished discussing the good similarity to the sun, if you are omitting anything. I am certainly omitting a lot, says Socrates. Well, don't, not even the smallest detail. I can handle the truth. Socrates, I think I will have to omit a fair amount. All the same, as far as is now possible, I won't purposely omit anything. Okay, we're getting the director's cut here. Please don't. Then you should think, as we said, that there are these two things, one sovereign of the intelligible kind and place, the other of the visible. I do not say of heaven, so as not to seem to you to be playing the sophist with the name. Okay, I will look at that note, although I think it remembers a short note. The place seems to be on the similarity of the sound between orano and orato. Heaven invisible. Okay. In any case, do you understand these two kinds, visible and intelligible? Okay, we're understanding the visible and the intelligible, so the seen world and this unseen world of forms. Glauc, and I do. Socrates, represent them then by a line divided into two unequal sections. Okay, visible, intelligible, in the same proportion as the line. In terms now of relative clarity and opacity, you will have as one subsection of the visible, images. Okay, so one subsection, so we got visible, intelligible, and there's a subsection of visible, which is images. By images, I mean first shadows, then reflections in bodies of water, and in all close-packed, smooth, and shiny materials, everything of that sort. Do you understand? Okay, so we have visible things, and some things are like reflected images, like you'd see in a mirror, or the surface of a lake, or whatever. Glauc, and I do understand. Then, in the other subsection of the visible, put the originals of those images, that is, animals around us, every plant, and the whole class of manufactured things. Okay, so those are not images. Those are the real things. Glauc, and I will. Would you also be willing to say, then, that as regards truth and untruth, the division is in this ratio? As what is believed is to what is known, so the likeness is to the thing it is like. Okay, truth and untruth. So I guess the image is like the untruth, and then kind of the real thing, the animals and plants that are not just mirrors, are the truth. And that's the ratio of truth to untruth. Maybe in the invisible world too? I don't know. Glaucon, certainly. Socrates, next, consider how the section of the intelligible is to be divided. How? As follows. In one subsection, the soul, using as images the things that were imitated before, is forced to base its inquiry on hypotheses, proceeding not to a first principle, but to a conclusion. In the other subsection, by contrast, it makes its way to the unhypothetical first principle, proceeding from a hypothesis, but without the images used in the previous subsection, using forms themselves and making its investigation through them. Okay, so in the invisible world, you've got sort of, I guess, this imagistic reasoning where maybe you have your conclusion already based on your hypothesis, and then in the other one, you start with a hypothesis without images, using the forms themselves. And we've seen that difference in the book so far. So, for example, when he's talking about the ship owner, that was speaking in images. And they're like, oh, Socrates, there you are speaking in images again. I noted that I didn't see the true significance until this passage. So he himself is saying there are two ways of reasoning, kind of pure reason and through images. So I think it would be important if you reread those passages to make that distinction. Is he using an image, or is he using kind of these pure things? Glaucon, I do not fully understand what you are saying. Socrates, let's try again. You see, you will understand it more easily after this explanation. I think you know that students of geometry, calculation, and the like hypothesize the odd and the even, the various figures, the three kinds of angles, and other things akin to these in each of their investigations, regarding them as known. These they treat as hypotheses and do not think it necessary to give any account of them, either to themselves or to others, as if they were evident to everyone. So I guess this is like geometry, like Euclid's 5 axioms. And going from these first principles through the remaining steps, they arrive in full agreement at the point they set out to reach in their investigation. Okay, so you don't actually question, like, they're like, is the Euclid's fifth axiom true? I don't know. Who cares? We get geometry without it. Or with if we assume it and we get all this Euclidean geometry. Glaucon, I certainly know that much. Then don't you also know that they use visible forms and make their arguments about them, although they are not thinking about them, but about those other things that they are like? They make their arguments with a view to the square itself and the diagonal itself, not the diagonal they draw, and similarly with the others. Okay, so when you're doing geometry, like, if you draw a picture in the sand over here, you're not talking about the actual square in the sand, you're talking about the abstract square. The very things they make and draw, of which shadows and reflections in water are images, they now in turn use as images in seeking to see those other things themselves that one cannot see except by means of thought. Okay, with relation to mathematics, this is very clear. Like, you write the number 2, you're not talking about the thing you just wrote, you're thinking about the abstract number 2. Glaucon, that's true. Socrates, this, then, is the kind of thing I said was intelligible. The soul is forced to use hypotheses in the investigation of it, not traveling up to a first principle, since it cannot escape or get above its hypotheses, but using as images those very things of which images were made by the things below them, and which, by comparison to their images, were thought to be clear and to be honored as such. Okay, so, like, if he's trying to prove the, like, side-angle side theorem or whatever in the sand, he's saying you're actually proving it abstractly. And similarly, when you're looking after these invisible things or these forms, you might use images, but really you're dealing with the abstract version. Glaucon, I understand that you mean what is dealt with in geometry and related crafts, just like I'm saying. Socrates, also understand then that by the other subsection of the intelligible I mean what reason itself grasps by the power of dialectical discussion, treating its hypotheses not as first principles, but as genuine hypotheses, that is, stepping stones and links in a chain, in order to arrive at what is unhypothetical in the first principle of everything. Having grasped this principle, it reverses itself, and keeping hold of what follows from it, comes down to a conclusion, making no use of anything visible at all, but only of forms themselves, moving on through forms to forms, and ending in forms. Whoa, okay, this is hardcore philosophy right here. I don't think I really understood that. I'm going to try to slow down with it a little bit. Okay, so he's saying you treat its hypotheses not as first principles, but as hypotheses, and then you arrive at the first principle of everything. So I think he's saying, sort of like how you don't question the axioms in geometry, we go with these discussions in order to get some result. And then it reverses itself, and keeping hold of what follows from it comes down to a conclusion. I don't know what he's talking about there. Reversing itself comes down, making no use of anything visible at all. So I guess it's like with geometry, you use the pictures to make your argument, but eventually you're like, okay, I've proved this in the abstract. And so he's saying his dialectical discussion, you use specific examples and things and images, but really you're getting at the forms of things. Okay. Glaucon, I understand, though not adequately. You see, in my opinion, you are speaking of an enormous task. You want to distinguish the part of what is and is intelligible, the part looked at by the science of dialectical discussion, as clearer than the part looked at by the so-called sciences, those for which hypotheses are first principles. And although those who look at the latter part are forced to do so by means of thought rather than sense perception, still, because they do not go back to a genuine first principle in considering it, but proceed from hypotheses, you do not think that they have true understanding of them, even though, given such a first principle, they are intelligible. And you seem to me to call the state of mind of the geometers, and the others of that sort, thought but not understanding, thought being intermediate between belief and understanding. Oh man, okay, now this is like the end of book 5, where it just starts getting real heavy. Okay, so he's saying these so-called sciences, so we need to make a distinction, I guess, between a first principle and a hypothesis. And he's saying the philosopher uses hypotheses to get to first principles, and then uses the first principle to reach conclusions. And then he's saying scientists, the hypotheses are the first principles. Just like, yeah, we have a model of an atom. That helps us explain all this other stuff. Are there really atoms? We don't really know or care. We're just trying to build a model here. I think that's what he's saying. I'm not totally sure. Okay, and then he's saying these scientists, so they are using thought, but you're saying these scientists don't have, like, you don't have a true understanding of the atom, because you don't go back to a genuine first principle. You're happy with your hypothesis as your first principle. So yeah, I think he's saying you're not really understanding all these sciences truly, I guess. I don't know. This is tough stuff. Like, you should spend some more time on this. I just want to finish this chapter at this point. Socrates, you have grasped my meaning most adequately. Join me, then, in taking these 4 conditions in the soul as corresponding to the 4 subsections of the line. Ah, here we go. And here's his imagistic reasoning. Understanding dealing with the highest, thought dealing with the second, assign belief to the third, and imagination to the last. Okay, so we had the visible world with, like, images and real stuff, and then we had the invisible world with things reached from hypotheses. No, I don't even remember how we divided that stuff up. Let me go back there. 3 kinds of angles. Yeah, okay, yeah, so that subsection, I'm going back here. Okay, so we used images for one subsection of the invisible, and then we kind of used find an unhypothetical first principle proceeding from a hypothesis but without the images. Okay. Okay, so we used images to get to a conclusion, or we used pure forms without images, I guess. Alright, so now everything's supposed to become clear. We have the four things. So we've got understanding, dealing with the highest. So understanding, thought, belief, and imagination. So understanding, I guess, is the dealing with the invisible world without images. Thought is dealing with the invisible world with images. Belief is dealing with the visible world not with reflections or images, and then imagination is the visible world with images. I think. I don't know. Arrange them in a proportion and consider that each shares in clarity to the degree that the subsection it deals with shares in truth. Glauc and I agree. I understand, agree, and arrange them as you say. Okay, I am exhausted from this. This is a pretty heavy discussion here. I recommend going back and just sitting down with this book and reading it for yourself. These last several pages here about this line and forms and thought. This is probably, I guess, this is one of the big contributions of the book is dealing his theory of forms, which was extremely influential for a very, very long time. Yeah, how it relates to everything else, I'm not totally sure. I guess we're trying to get at the nature of the good in order to provide a justification for justice. And to get to the nature of the good, we need this theory of forms. So I think that's how it fits into the bigger picture. But I don't really know. So we started this video talking about the philosophy and what kinds of constitutions will support philosophy, and then lo and behold, it is just the sort of city that he had been describing, and like that's the constitution you need, and it might appear in we might get a true philosopher in a barbaric place, but in order to affect justice or the just city, we need the philosopher to be in charge. And to treat all the people like a clean slate and just kind of program their minds however he wants. And and they're supposed to take it calmly somehow. And Glaucon's like, I don't think they're going to agree to that. He's like, yeah, they'll like it. They'll be persuaded by us. So if he has kind of true dark philosopher arts that just persuades people into whatever he wants, then maybe he can get away with this. But my take is, in the real world, this is not going to fly at all. But maybe he knows this. Maybe he's being ironic or esoteric here. So he gets through that discussion of what how the philosopher is going to be charged. And he says you got kind of the path where the philosopher takes charge, or kind of persuades the people to put him in charge, or they realize that he needs to be in charge, or you have this future king who realizes that who has the philosophical nature, and thereby becomes the philosopher king. And so he says, all we were trying to prove before is that if it's possible, then it's best. And he's like, here, it's kind of possible. We might maybe get a philosopher king to show up one day in the whole of time. I guess that's good enough. Therefore, it's the best. And then we get into this discussion of the good and the forms. I don't know. I don't know if he's kind of done with the philosopher king at this point, and now he's just going to talk about the nature of the good and the nature of forms and the nature of knowledge more. That, to me, is certainly the most boring part, just because it gets to be extremely abstract. But I don't know. Maybe something will be interesting. So go back and study this section again. I probably will, to try to make a little more sense of it. Just the difference between belief, imagination, thoughts, and forms, and especially the hypothesis versus first principle. Try to figure out what that's all about, and leave a comment and tell me what you find. Okay, so that finishes up Book 6 for us. We are going to start Book 7 tomorrow. I hope by now you're subscribed to the channel. Hit the like button on this video, and share it with your friends if you're excited about reading Plato here on the channel. See you tomorrow.